Welcome to Lessons in Rural Community Engagement, a conversation series with Chelsey Patriss and Rosa Fernandez of the Health Equity Partnership of North Central Massachusetts. Who are we to be doing this how-to guide on community engagement?
But we're a coalition, and I think that we got to put some of that context into it. We're leading a coalition, so if we don't have those skill sets, who are we to lead a group of diverse people?
That's true. And you've been doing community engagement for 25 plus years. I mean, 30 years. I don't know how long you've been
I
doing
don't want to
it.
say my age, but something like that, Chelsey. But
And then I've been doing community engagement work with the China for 10 years now.
Yeah, and it started grassroots. At least in my career, it started grassroots where I actually did home visits and saw how people lived. And
So finding what engagement looks like. And I think it's important to think about what you want out of community engagement. If you're looking for, a long-term relationship in your community and you want your organization to be really embedded in your community and responsive to community, if maybe it's not like the core mission organization and you're coming in to do some kind of assessment work, a little bit more transactional.
I think also about engagement is not being left out. Where we're really being inclusive, and especially when we're doing this type of work, that we don't make assumptions that people do want to engage or that some don't want to be bothered or not engaged. And so what do we do to make them feel like they're part of the strategies and the processes that we put in place?
So what do you mean when you say some people may not want to be engaged? What
the topics that drive them to want to be engaged. So the topics are so important in what we're picking. If it doesn't drive somebody, if they're not passionate about it, they're not going to be engaged. They're going to be distant and isolated because we're not addressing those particular needs to that population.
Yeah, and I think really needs to be authentic and that it can't be transactional the way that, if you're going to do an assessment, that's a very surface level of community engagement. And
it feels like checking the box type of thing instead of being back to authentic and organic about what we really are trying to achieve.
Right.
And sometimes those are the root of the problems. And then we stay in this high level and don't really dig deep enough to what is really happening in our communities. So we gotta really engage really the community so that way we undo those things and understand what are the issues that are affecting our communities.
Right. So we're talking about set the agenda in a way, right? Not coming in with this is what we're going to engage you about community and expecting them to be enthusiastic and responsive to what we're asking. And it's more about really finding out and learning from them what their priorities are and how they want to be engaged. And I was telling my husband that we were doing this morning, and he said, I think number one is you have to like people, and that means I'm out. I laughed, but it's kind of true. You can't do community engagement for real if people don't really think you care about them.
Right.
Right.
I agree with that.
Or that you identify with them, in any way. And I think if you are uncomfortable, if this is your job and you were tasked with doing this and you are uncomfortable either with a particular population that you don't identify with, or you are just uncomfortable in a particular community, maybe geographically, you're not from that area or whatever, and you feel like you can't authentically engage with that community, you need to pair up with someone who is from that community who can help you bridge that. Because if you just come in with a list of questions and people are getting the feeling that you're not even actually listening to the answers, you're just recording them or taking notes and then you look at your clock and you're like, okay, the 10 minutes that we had for that, now we're going to move on to this next question. And somebody's in the middle of like pouring their heart out about the situation that they found themselves in, or you're more concerned about whether everybody has had a chance to talk than you are about what their stories are and what they want to talk about. Like, they can tell, right?
It's about commitment.
Yeah.
And dedication. If you're really committed to the community, people can see that. Right, it bleeds right through you, and you can't. People are people. They can feel humanity. There's a certain energy, and people can feel when you're being really genuine about how you feel about them.
I think, when you're in a rural community, it's, I think, a little bit harder because people really expect you to know something about their community and they can see right through you if you don't.
Right.
It starts with, can you pronounce the name of the town correctly and the names of, other things in and around the town.
And they get really touchy. I've learned that has been the change of, at least for me, coming up from a city person. When I go into those communities and they're like, no, it's not how you pronounce it, or you're not a Clintonian, or you're not from this community. It's like a sort of like a pride in their towns. And
yeah.
Oh, let me correct you. They'll stop me in my tracks.
Yeah.
And have no shame about
Yep.
letting you know.
And you need to know, like, at least not every detail of the history of the town, but some of the, like, more important points about the relationships between certain towns, like
Right.
how this town feels about their neighboring town, or how they feel about the merger of a school district, or the placement of the dump, or like things that have like that really get under people's skin.
Yeah, we talked about community engagement. It's also about that, really understanding where everyone comes from. And again, we default to these assumptions because I used to be like, oh my gosh, the privilege and the pride, but really there was there's other underlying things. We all have our biases, and that's when I started to really being biased with, like certain groups.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think like that's part of community engagement too, right? That knowing what your own biases are and what assumptions you're coming in with as you talk to a community, and being really ready to let go of those, and to have those corrected. I think you cannot do community engagement work well with any kind of ego, because you are going to get corrected so many times. You're going to get called on stuff all the time, and if the people who you want to be at these things and to be engaged, they are the kind of people who are going to tell you what they're thinking, right? They're going to speak up, and that's what you want.
Exactly.
But it's also, you have to be ready to hear it too, and be humble enough to take it.
Yeah, I agree. You got to go in through a cultural humility lens when you're doing this work, because we're talking about people with all walks of life. So they're going to come into this space, and we got to make this space safe and where they feel brave enough to speak from their own experience or knowledge, because that's how we start to be authentic and learn from one another. And that's when we start to feel like, oh, those aha moments where you're like, all this time I thought this one way, but all along there's other truths behind the way people engage with those assumptions. We always assumptions about each other, so we don't engage properly, or under these assumptions, and then the trust is lost.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Lessons in Rural Community Engagement with the Health Equity Partnership of North Central Massachusetts, and paid for by a grant from the Massachusetts Department of Public Health through the New England Rural Health Association.